message from Sunday. And so I am here with our senior pastor, Reverend Daniel Humbert, and today we are walking through the Huddle Guide. And I have included a link to this week's Huddle Guide in the description of this video, so it'll either be above me or below me. But I hope that you'll follow along and ask some of these discussion questions around the dinner table. So I'll just go ahead and jump into our first question. We're in the worship series Gear Up, where we're talking about gearing up to serve. And this week was all focused on putting on the clothing of Christ. And Paul refers to the clothing of Christ as putting on love, humility, meekness, patience, compassion, and kindness, plus the fruits of the Spirit. And then Pastor Daniel added in forgiveness and peace. So that's a lot of clothing that we're meant to be putting on as Christians. So our very first question from the Huddle discussion is, how are you wearing these clothes these days?
Yeah, well, so it's hard, right? I mean, so part of the reason we did this series was to recognize that we're all sort of followers of Jesus. We've all got stuff that we can be doing to serve others, right? This gear up. And so Paul describes this I refer to it as an ensemble, right? It is this collection of clothing that we can wear. And I love his analogy, right? His analogy is phenomenal because it's right on this whole sense in which when I wear something that, when we pick out clothes, we pick out stuff we like, what we want to wear. And sometimes it's about an attitude. Sometimes it's about the way I want to feel. Sometimes it's about just how I want to be for the day, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but often the clothing I put on literally kind of makes me feel a certain way. And so I think he's right on target. And so in these days, I think these clothes that he asks us to wear, it's hard, right? Because of the conflict in society and the tensions that are there, both between COVID and the elections and news media and just all kinds of stuff. I hope, and I'll just preface it with that, I hope that I've been putting on kindness fairly well, and that I'm hoping that I'm putting on love fairly well in terms of interfacing and interacting with people with whom I may disagree or not have the same kinds of worldviews. And I'm constantly being amazed at the ways in which I'm really different from other people and they from me. And it's been quite challenging. I know for me, I can only assume for others, to put these particular clothes on at this time in the world. So I'm hoping those are the ones I'm doing the best. I hope the other ones are actually there. I just don't know if I'm doing them well or not.
Yeah, I think that I was also struggling with this question because we're all living within our little bubble right now of, the people that we are choosing to spend time with during COVID and trying to limit the number of people that we're exposing our germs to. And so normally, if you had asked me this question a year ago, I would have had an easy gut check and thought about, okay, what are all of the interactions I've had with different people throughout the week to know if I'm, putting on these clothes. And now I think sometimes it's harder for me because the people that I'm choosing to be around are my two best friends in the world and my family, and that's it. And I'm at work, but even then, I try and stay in my office as much as possible to stay safe. So I think that sometimes when I'm only surrounding myself with my family and my closest friends, I am less likely to put on love and patience and all these things because I let my guard down and I don't have as much of a filter, and I already don't have a filter with other people, but it's even lower with family. And sometimes I just immediately go to the worst side of myself because I feel comfortable to do it. I know they'll love me no matter what.
Yeah. Isn't that true? Yeah. It's funny how we treat family and very close friends, because the irony is we probably ought to be treating them better. But all of us, at least everybody I know, including myself, treats family and very close friends so um, um, well, I don't know, just the way you described.
Mhm.
It's hard.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is I don't know how I've been wearing the clothes. I haven't been as reflective lately as I would have been, and I need to change that.
Yeah.
But question number 2, what's most difficult about these clothes? And I want to hone in on this question because we already talked about the difficulty of, COVID. We're not as exposed to as many people, but among humility, meekness, patience, love, compassion, and kindness, what is the most difficult clothing for you to put on?
Yeah. I'll identify two here as well. And one is patience. I identified that in the message on Sunday just because I am innately an impatient person. And so sometimes I struggle with um, having patience with people, either because not so much that they may disagree with me, but that either I don't appreciate what they're doing or how they're interacting or the way in which they can't quite get to point B from point A and point C past point B. And so I struggle with patience. The other is meekness, and I think I struggle with it because of sort of the original concept. Meekness. It's interesting. The sort of alternative English word for meekness is gentleness, and yet the original context of that word in the Greek was it was often used as a way to describe how a horse is bridled. And so if a horse is bridled, that was the word was meek. And the concept there was it's controlling its power and it's allowing itself, once the bridle's put in, it's allowing itself to be controlled. And so meekness there is sort of this whole sense in which I have power, I have ability, I have capacity, but I'm allowing myself to be constrained, in this case, by Christ or be constrained by my faith. And that's a challenge, I think, for every last one of us. And I think often we think of people who are meek as weak and not really having capacity. But really, it's about having the power and capacity, but willingly choosing to be constrained by Jesus himself. And I think I want to be there and I want to do that, but I often have my own will, my own desire, all that kind of stuff. So it's hard.
Yeah, meekness. Me too. I feel like anyone who knows me would hear that list and be like, Alyssa struggles with meekness. And it's the whole thing of like it's allowing yourself to be controlled. And it's an interesting paradigm
Yep.
between because we so often talking about the freedom that comes with Christ. And yet now we're talking about being bridled by Christ. How do those meld together?
Yeah. Well, it is hard. It doesn't seem to make logical sense, but trying to think of an analogy, and I don't know that this is the best analogy, but it's kind of the best one I can come up with. I mean, here in America, we pride ourselves on our freedom, right? We got the freedom of speech and freedom of religion and freedom of the press, and all of that is good. And yet, there are clearly still laws. There are still clearly boundaries. There are also responsibilities that go with all that. I can't, as the old argument goes, I can't run into a movie theater and yell fire and not expect that it will cause havoc in such a way that I could actually be held responsible for that, even though we have freedom of speech. And so there's this sense in which I am bridled by the laws and the expectations of society, social mores, even though I have all this freedom for our country. And I think with regard to faith, it's the same way. I willingly, and so there's freedom in that, I willingly submit myself to Jesus so that I can have the freedom of heart and mind and soul that he offers. But it doesn't make logical sense, but it makes theological sense, I guess, is the best way to put that.
Hmm. Well, our last question from today's huddle discussion is why is this clothing important to representing Jesus?
Mm. Well, first of all, I have to own that none of us, and certainly I speak for myself, get it right all the time, right? We've already owned sort of what's difficult and what we might be living well into, but none of us gets it right and perfect. And yet, I believe it's important, and clearly Paul thought it was important, because it's what most closely aligns us with faith in Jesus, and it becomes our witness to other people. It sort of helps us to say, man, there's something different about those Christian folk. There's something different about how they conduct themselves. And when you think about this ensemble of clothing, it's really quite countercultural, isn't it? It's not part of our culture right now at all. And I maintain probably longer than any of us would imagine to be compassionate, to be meek. Meekness is clearly not an American value. Um, to be humble, I would hope kindness would not so much be counterculture, but we've clearly witnessed that it is sometimes. And so it's something that Christ is calling us to, that we need to sort of witness to the fact that, man, if I'm a follower of Jesus, I need to somehow be different, somehow distinctive, and not better than just I've got some obligations here, and my obligations are to be compassionate and kind and patient and humble and meek and all of that stuff. And that's why I think it's important. And I believe, unfortunately, over this last year, really more than a year, but certainly COVID has demonstrated, and the political cycle has demonstrated that, man, we got people claiming Jesus and not being very kind, or not being very compassionate, and not being very humble, and not being very meek. And that does great damage to the faith, and it does great damage to the cause of Christ. And so to me, that's why it's important.
Mm. Yeah, and uh, man, it makes me think of when I was in college, I was president of the Wesley Foundation, and there was a girl who came to everything. She came to every Wednesday night worship service, every meal that we had, but she openly proclaimed that she's atheist.
Mm.
But she came to absolutely everything. And so she and I, we never talked about Jesus. We became friends over time. And one day, when we finally got to the point that we were comfortable having conversations, I asked her, I was like, hey, Emily, like, I know that you're atheist. I'm not going to try and change that about you. I'm just curious, why do you keep coming to the Wesley? Because I just want to know, like, that's unusual. I've never experienced that before. And her answer was, I don't know. I know that this is a safe place for me, and I love the people here. And I was like, man, she can claim to be an atheist for the rest of her life, but she's met Jesus here. And even if she never has a conversation about Jesus, and it's because she saw the way that people acted, and the way that people treated each other, and the way that we served the community, and all of these things. And whether she chooses to follow Christ or not, she has seen what that community represents and who Christ is. And and so I think that is a responsibility that all of us have constantly. And you never know who's watching, and you never know who's observing and what they're learning, and they're meeting Jesus without ever having a conversation about the Bible or about God or about faith or anything. They're just watching you and getting an understanding of, who is this Christ that you say you follow?
Well, and that's it, right? And I think we all know, whether cliche-ish or not, that actions speak louder than words, and these clothes are actions, right? And so, as you rightfully point out, Emily was encountering Jesus on a lot of different levels with relationships with other people, and our obligation as a follower of Jesus is not for the conversion of somebody else, but it is that we demonstrate His will and His ways, and these clothes are some of those ways, right? To be compassionate, to be kind, humble, so forth. That is the way of Jesus. And so that's why it's important. And as you say, golly, we never know who's watching, whether child, youth, or adult in our lives. And therefore, our actions, as best we can, need to match our words. And when they don't, it is a poor witness for the cause of Christ. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is all that we have time for today. So thank you again for joining us for another episode of Go Beyond. And you can catch all previous episodes at tmumc.org/go beyond. And we will see y'all again on Wednesday at 12:30 for more questions to help us dig deeper into Sunday's message. So I